We are currently in a museum, Fashion for Good, in Amsterdam, which recently opened its exhibition called Knowing Cotton Otherwise. Cotton is probably the world's most known fabric, with, at the same time, a lot of unknown and untold stories behind it. And some of these stories were collected and brought together in an exhibition about cotton, focusing on collectivity and community, while also showing the perspectives of various people and artists. And 3 of these artists are sitting with me here today, and we're going to have a conversation. We are in a museum and we are in Amsterdam, so there might be some background noises that you will hear since we are very much in the center. But yeah, I'm really happy to welcome Noah Cohen, Caithlin Courtney Chong, and Niño Divino. Welcome. I kind of want to start out by introducing the 3 of you, but I always think it's nicer if you introduce yourself. So maybe you want to go first, since you sit next to me.
Yes, sure.
Tell us who you are, what you do.
Yes, sure. My name is Niño Divino, and I'm a multidisciplinary artist. I'm from Aruba, the Caribbean. And most of the time I touch upon fashion department, but at the same time trying to combine it with sound installations, bringing an utopian world, as I like to call it, with my work, honest dance between nostalgia and melancholy. So that's a bit about me.
Nice. How about you?
I'm Caithlin Chong. I say Caithlin Courtney Chong. I don't know which one to use yet. But I say I'm a multidisciplinary artist who uses textile and also writing to combine into an installation. But yeah, it could be from anything from visually videos to like writing, just writing itself. So kind of like all over the place a bit. Yeah.
And you, Noah?
So I'm Noah Cohen. I'm a sculptor, video maker, and I'm doing installation. I'm from Paris, and I'm really attracted with how within my art I can connect with my urban environment, and I like to spend a lot of time outside picking up random stuff in the street and see how I can relate with that.
All right, super nice. I kind of want to start out with you, Niño, since you've created an installation for Knowing Cotton Otherwise. And I kind of was curious if when you first heard that the subject is going to be cotton, what were your thoughts? And also, did you immediately know what you wanted to create?
Well, before they approached me, I know that I didn't know yet about the concept that they were going to bring. And then slowly I received emails and more informations about it. And then I saw the word cotton. And immediately when I hear about cotton, I have to go back to the slavery. I have to go back to the labors that used to, how it used to be. And I thought I have to also bring it in a way that connects with the Dutch Caribbean Antillen, and which is very important to me because normally we don't talk about them, or especially in the Netherlands, we don't hear much about them. So for me, it was very important to bring it in my own view and bring it into my own context of how we see cotton there, what cotton meant for us. So I wanted to really create an installation based on the seashores of Aruba, these fishermen's, and also using different aspects of, the indigenous Afro-Caribbean heritage that comes with the color white. Of course, cotton is also white, something very precious. That's a bit of when I heard it immediately. It go back to the past and bring it to the forefront again, and question what is cotton for us now in the future, especially in a multidisciplinary context.
I think it's beautiful that you said that, also because Fashion for Good always wants to highlight the past, the present, and the future. And I think especially with a subject like this, that is super important and almost something you can't leave out.
Yeah, exactly.
Yet oftentimes it's not discussed.
Yep.
So I think it's interesting that you obviously first, for me it's also something that feels very obvious to go back to the past and then, relate it to where we are now and where we're going. But yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, sure.
Caitlyn, for you it was a little bit different because you basically did like a continuation of already existing work of yours, Children of Iguaran. Sorry. And we also have the book right here. And I kind of was wondering, because you work with dyeing and with textile and cotton specifically, why is textile dyeing and cotton something that you were interested in and that you wanted to center in your work?
It actually wasn't even, I didn't even realize that I was interested in it until I started making, because it was more testing out. And I started out with synthetic printing to see how it looked, and it was just too fake for me. And then I was also mentioning indigo in my story, so I was like, why don't I bring that just back in the work itself? And indigo is a very natural product, so it only absorbs very beautifully on natural materials. So cotton or linen would have been the best ones to use, and cotton was just, it absorbed it beautifully. So it's like working with this very natural pigment and working with this material, they complement each other so well. And also the history of indigo and the history of cotton are intertwined because of the slave trade. So they all came from these different countries and then they end up somewhere else and people are using them. And indigo is like the only natural blue dye that turns blue. Blues, or every blue that you ever wear or see within textile is from the indigo. And then that just like kind of the history behind that was also like connected with my story that I've been writing for a year then. So like all these pieces kind of worked very well together at the end, that I created this installation for you to read the book and listen to the book. Yeah.
All right. And for you, Noah, I think it's really interesting, or what is really interesting about the exhibition is that you have a lot of educational parts, which is obviously important with a subject like this, but at the same time, if you look around, there's also a lot of work that feels a bit less literal, because you as a viewer, or at least if I talk about myself, me as a viewer and as an audience, I look around and I just have to make my own assumptions sometimes, or at least that's what I try to do before reading the text and stuff like that. And then you look at work that kind of makes you think, oh, but how is this related to cotton? But I think that is what makes the exhibition very layered and interesting. And I think your work, Noah, is a very good example for that, because when you look at it, you see like the deconstruction and you learn about the reuse of material and the recycling, and it can almost be seen as like a metaphor for the reuse and recycling of cotton, which then makes you think about origin and traceability. And I was just really interested about what made you start work like this, and what made you want to create art from already existing materials?
I wanted to be myself outside, actually. And I think I've never felt really, at the beginning of my artistic practice in general, there was always a bit like a will of trying to find the spaces of freedom for myself. And in general, for me, those spaces of freedom, I would always find them the most when I was outside. And I was really strongly relating to my environment in Paris. I was spending a lot of time outside, and this feeling of symbiosis, of creating freedom for yourself by also like trying to fit in your environment somehow, and like trying to shape each other, like you shaping the environment and the environment shaping you, and trying to build up like some kind of freedom, but some kind of also building yourself.
Like, I think that's also what all three of you have in common, is like that you think of the meaning of materials and the meaning of objects and their history, and also maybe depending on which context you put them in, how they change. I'm also curious, like, why would you say, and why do you think it's important to think of the meaning of objects and the things that we wear and that surround us? Maybe one of you.
I've always been in an obsession with objects. Especially the objects that I grew up looking at my place or at my Caribbean or my grandmother's places. For me, when I see them activate these objects, it also becomes like, but why are you activating these objects? How are you doing it? Why are you doing it as well? I also have to do a deep dive into what is the first connotation with these objects and how have they been taken out of the context because of people grabbing them and making them their own. And so that means that, for example, the object that we see on the tables that I grew up with, especially the Agua de Maravilla, is used by also women and men. So that means that I grew up watching my mother doing something different than my father. That means that it has a different value for my mother and different value for my father as well. So that means that I'm in a constant dance between that world. So that means if I have to question and research about these objects through my mother's perspective, I also have to question about through my father's perspective. That means I can also identify and start creating my own meaning around that object. And most of the times when I do that, I intend to go back to the child. I intend to go back to the eyes of a child, how I see it, what does the color mean to me, the smell, because all of this object has a smell to me, a shape, a type of
how it triggers your senses.
Exactly, because it triggers so many senses in your body that it becomes almost this altar for your own body, and that's how I also use objects. I let the objects also take over me, and then I take over them by deconstructing them, by singing for them, dancing for them, soak them in water and see what happens with the colors, and then bring them up again. So I try to really use this object as they were a baby for me, you know?
And you give them a new meaning.
I give them a new meaning. That's how I create as my work. So that means that I also bring new memories for them as well. And then when people see me activating these objects, so I can also try to provoke senses in their own way to grab these objects or whatever object they can have around their home and to make it their own, you know? By doing whatever you want to feel by doing it.
Can you explain what you mean by activating objects?
Yeah, sure. So for example, if I use the objects that we see on the table, most of the times they are being used for pain. When you have pain back in the Caribbean, so you use it to kind of like ease the pain. And for example, my mother used it for cleaning rituals, and my father used it also for like to dye colors or to clean fabrics or t-shirts, or so for everyone it has a different connotation. So for me, when I activate these objects is in a way of like using the smell as a cologne, using the smell in a different way, using the bottles in a different way of kind of like using also the mixture between the cleaning of the home, of using these, letting the smell provoke me and sing through these objects or for the objects as well. So I use them more of a ritualistic way, and that's how I activate these. They activate me as well to do this type of mannerisms or performative rituals. So yeah.
How about you, Caitlyn?
I was thinking, when I started creating the space for the book, because the book came first, and it tells a story about three sisters going through this adventure, and it's heavily related and inspired by growing up in the Caribbean as well, and trying to make kind of like a science fiction mythological story about this place, seeing as we don't really have a lot of stories selling these stories within the Dutch Caribbean. And then like creating the space for this was being very aware of what context am I putting this story in, because it's very predominantly white academy where I studied at, and putting it in a very Dutch context, with the idea of colonialism also not being a topic talked about. I was like, am I gonna create a space that is literally translated from the book, and then setting that up would have a very different impact than creating a very fictional place to just read and relax. So the space that I ended up creating was kind of, for me, bringing me back to like the ocean, these textures of these calmness, having the sound of the ocean also present in the space, and having me telling the story in papiamento. And then just like thinking of how to create a space wherein the context of the book is still present, but in a more relaxed manner that is not for kind of like, not per se for a Dutch viewer, but just for people from the island, bringing them back there. Because that was my main purpose. Like, if you are from this place, I hope to connect you back to this in the sense of a remembrance or the sense of feeling. And if you are not from this place, that you can get a sense of what it means to me in that sense. So also having the color blue be very present in the area, and then just mixing that and like trying to make the space feel feel just like a calm place where you can just enter and leave everything outside and just immerse yourself in the story. And then we can have a conversation about that afterwards if you want to. So it's very being open as to that and welcoming the experience that people receive in the space and interact with the space.
Interesting. I also would love to know a little bit more about all of you's processes, because, for instance, I'm curious how you look for your materials, where you find them. Like, do you go out and know specifically I'm looking for this, or do you just come across things?
I'm not especially looking for something specific, and I'm looking actually for the thing that I won't imagine I would find somewhere or in the city. I mean, that's the best occasion. And for example, like for this piece that is behind us over there.
Unfortunately our audience can't see it, but you brought a little object from it on the table. So basically
this is more of another, I mean, there is two sides of object I found. There is, so the more like a very, the encounters that are pretty rare of like an object that I'm really interested by, and I will do anything to take it back with me, even if it means like walking 10 kilometers with it on my back. And it happened a lot, and I think that's also part of the relation I like to have, that my body is really involved with the process, and that I put some effort into doing it, and also I share already some kind of a story, and even some kind of a body relation with the object. But there is some object that I take anyway that have very strong symbolism for me, and that I found really much in the city. And for example, broken glass or broken mirror, which are really common to find. And I always like to make some allegories with it, or try to see what it means. Broken mirrors have a lot of symbolism, of course, but for me it really relates to, especially, I mean, in every city, but Amsterdam, for example, it have a lot of windows, a lot of mirrors, and you're always seeing the reflection of yourself somehow. And I mean, in general, in our society, you're always confronted to the reflection of yourself through like a mirror, a window, or like through like photos, or And the fact that I found a lot of them thrown in the ground, it means somehow, I mean, I have this feeling that, you know, it's like this overwhelming of mirrors and stuff, and people have to throw them away, or I don't know, there is so much that, but that a lot are ended up in the ground. But I like it also, and I really like, I was feeling that I like to see myself better in a broken mirror than in a plain mirror, because I feel it was representing a bit more the complexity that I was liking to see within me. And
yeah, it's actually similar to what you've said about how the objects become something different and you give new meaning to them, and the same goes for you.
Yeah, it gives meaning to you also.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there is really this double thing. I think I'm also affected with the object I found, and I like to think that I'm not it's not a one-sided way of me controlling my environment, but I'm pretty aware. I like to believe that it's
an exchange,
half also affecting me and shaping me somehow.
I was wondering, I think the museum host told me that before you started that you first cleaned the space also with Florida water and maybe some other things that we see on the table.
Yes.
And that made me think that, for instance, the two of you share something that is really personal to you and connected to your history, but then at the same time, therefore, I think a lot of people can also relate to it because it's like a shared experience that others have as well. And as you said, maybe others can't, but then they learn something through it. But that also made me think how it feels for the both of you to share something that is so personal and connected to your history in big institutions and buildings like these, which is almost like a super big contrast.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe Caitlyn?
Yeah, I think for me, when I got invited to do this show, it was very much how the history they were doing cotton and the history of that connects very well with my work, I think. And then doing that was oh wow, I can show these things. But for me, the book wasn't necessarily on the forefront. It was more the indigo. And I also got to work with Recyclum, which is this Italian company that reuses textile to make their own dye. So I also got to experiment with that and seeing how the synthetic, which is actually not 100% synthetic, but becomes synthetic through the process of making it, correlates very well with the natural of it. So it was very experimental in that sense that just creating the space here was completely different in a sense than creating a space originally. So this is for me a whole new space and a whole new experience that I set these work in that kind of makes it the first part of it completely different. So it's more the first part was telling the story how I wanted to tell it. The second part is me with the help of Fashion for Good, telling the story in a different way to a more general, bigger public. And that it's two different works in that sense. And I could do what I wanted to do the first time and then let it go and do something completely different with the same pieces, but in a very different context. So kind of letting it go and just letting it be for what it is and not necessarily putting a lot of big emphasis on the whole history of it. It's two separate works in my mind. I don't know if I'm explaining it correctly or well.
Yeah, I can follow you. Yeah. How about you?
For me, I know that coming in different institutions, especially white institutions, I think my experiences that I have experienced in Amsterdam as a Caribbean also maybe a lot of belittlements about my own heritage, and also that maybe it's too kitsch for them, and different connotations that is not positive, and
a lot of assumptions also.
Exactly, a lot of assumptions and a lot of stories they make that actually it's not actually what it is. So I'm always in that forefront to be okay, now I'm going to tell you actually how the story is really, how really the story is. For me, it's always, if I'm going to present a work that comes from such a deep state of culture, I have to also I don't only bring myself forefront, but I also bring my ancestors with me. I also bring their habits and their rituals that they grew up doing. So that means that it is my duty as well to venerate them and honor them with their own rituals. So that means that I have to decolonize the space. I have to decolonize my body and decolonize my work to also embrace what I present there. Is being accepted and being completely unapologetically shown, with no shame, but to actually reclaim the identity completely. So it's always creating that altarismo, no? That altarism. It's a terminology that I adopted from Laura Y. Perez for my thesis, and basically the book is very telling how everything could become your altar. How clothing becomes altar, part of your body, how spices into your home when you're cooking becomes the altar, how tattoos on your body becomes a compilation of altars. So that means that you're constantly in that veneration of your own body, and you're constantly in that like I say, I like to use that dance between the altar and your life. So that means I also have to have a dance with my ancestors to the forefront with their rituals, and to almost bow down to them, and to put them into a mental space that they deserve.
What struck me when I first came in is that my process was a lot about thinking about objects and materials when I was looking at all of the work, actually. But then at a certain point, I took someone with me, and they perceived it totally different, and were like more wondering about the relation to nature. And I was like, oh, how did I not think about this? This obviously makes total sense. And so I was really curious, actually, like, what your relation, you already talked about your environment a lot, but also what your relation is to nature and how it informs and influences your work, especially when we talk also about dying, and you mentioned like water and all of these things.
Yeah, I think for me the dyeing is very much because you have shibori, which is the Japanese technique of dyeing, which is a very traditional way that have different patterns. They know how to do it, how to bind it, and you get these patterns, and it's very written down. You can just do it, and you know what pattern you're doing. So I tried it out, and I was like, it's not really for me. I'm a more experimental-wise, just trying different binding techniques and seeing how it goes, and not having any idea what the process is going to be, and then the water doing most of the work, because of mixed indigo bath is like water, the indigo powder, some fructose and some calc, and you have your bath. And then you just dip your cloth in, and then the water does all the work. And then with indigo as well, after you dip it, you can wash it, and the oxygen from water kind of makes it blue, because the color itself is a bit greeny, yellowish brown, and the oxygen makes it blue. So when you mix it with water, that's when the blue comes out. And that for me is a very beautiful transition from not really knowing what the fabric is gonna be like then after dyeing. And as much as like how many times you dip it, then it becomes darker or darker. So all of these things are like having an impact, and not having control over what the outcome is gonna be, like leaving the control totally to the water, let it do its thing. And then the prints that you get then are also very much organic, and you can make them unorganic as well, but I create them in a very much organic way, so people can see different things when they look into it. And then I don't know, I really like that process of like not really having any control of what's gonna happen to the end product.
With me, with nature especially, has been a very important one, is because going back to do my research for my thesis back on Aruba, I come to realize that how we come from water as well. Our ancestors come from water, and most of us really forget that our ancestors used to come to Aruba because Aruba used to be a sanctuary for our ancestors. So that means that they used to come to Aruba to bury their loved ones, and they used to come and do rituals alongside the periphery. So that means that most of these rocks that we have next to the periphery, next to the coast of Aruba, their body is laid there. So that means that for me, nature, I connect a lot with life and death, actually. Most of connecting back to my work, it's a veneration to the fishermen. Most of these fishermen provides fish and food for us, but also most of these fishermen also die on the oceans. That's how rough it is. In general. So that means that also I feel like we don't pay much attention to how much water means to us. In the Caribbean especially, we use it for curing depression, curing anxiety. We use it for a lot of certain offerings, as I like to call it, offerings with the body alongside the water. So nature has always been, especially water, has been so vital to us. And to till this day, the object that I have on the table comes from the water as well. So for me, it's that beauty between seeing someone passes away as well through water, because we believe also that water for us is women. So they go a lot with fishermen, men especially. So all of that belief, I'm so fascinated by them, and bring them back close to us, and use it more as a method to be aware and consciousness and offerings for the body. Yeah.
How about you?
For me, nature is coming more with the idea of evolution, of changing, of adaptation. And I think my practice of trying to take materials from my environment and trying to modify them and trying to let them modify me was a way to see nature in this environment that is actually have nothing natural somehow. I don't think now so much there is like a difference between natural nature and artificial nature. I think the two coexist now, and for me it was really having to accept that, because especially in Netherlands, nothing is really natural here, even like the forest or the lakes, everything is artificial. Doesn't help so much from getting the feeling of a nature, but I think then it's more of I would say an attitude that I'm trying to have toward my environment, and especially trying to build this empathy of this have to be nature, either it's just a cold, not changing environment, and if I'm not living in a natural environment, I'm not natural myself either, and it cannot be so much. So I have to navigate through like this is what really actually built my practice, is trying to revive somehow the environment, the urban environment around me, and trying to see the nature within it.
I think for me it's also like sometimes when you're in like an environment like this and in a city, it's easy to forget that you are part of nature, and I think we tend to see ourselves a bit opposite of nature, something that we look at or go to for like relaxation or something like that. But I can imagine that for you, the way that you also grew up was probably way more like being like in nature and part of nature. I would love to know what is something, like maybe a big lesson that you've learned while creating and while like in the process of working, Could be for the work that is shown in the museum, but could also just be in general something that you really took away where it could be about cotton, but can also be something completely different about your process or whatever you want to share. I'm also going to give you a second to think of it.
For me, something that I've really learned through my practice along the way with everything I've done is also to die with the work.
To die with the work?
To die with the work.
Explain what that means.
I feel like a lot of times I intend to lock myself into my room or into my studio and to really deep dive really deep into what I'm going to do for each specific project. And I also realize that I'm also getting very romantic with my work. So that means that a lot of times when I put it outside, or for example, especially with this one that I presented, Coastal, I also had to come to terms that I'm going to dedicate this to all of the themes or all of the connotations with fishermen dying, my ancestors. I also have to accept that they are already gone as well. But that means that I also have to die in order for me to to kind of like re-birth again with different projects, with different. It's almost like I see my work as a human. I see my work as a living soul that I get so much attached to it and obsessive with it that it becomes very toxic for me, and that I can constantly be in that state of thinking and romanticizing it too much that I have to let it go.
I think it's also part of letting go. I think like for me, I do a lot of research before I even start making. So I have all these histories that I'm researching of these materials, of the story itself, like all of these used, because I'm inspired by, like for the book, it's very inspired by D&D and Greek and Roman and Yoruba mythology as well. So like researching all of these histories and then trying to create my own, but then when everything is said and done, the work is done. The book is not done yet, but the work right now it's in completion. To let go of like all of these research and then not showing up and having these conversations with people, and then like you were like so excited to have like, oh my god, I have all this knowledge I want to share, and then it's like, but then the interaction is completely different than what you have imagined.
Yeah. So
kind of letting go of expectations of the public engaging with the work.
Yeah.
Also, even if they do engage, because the first time I showed the work, it's an installation. People can come in and sit down and touch things.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of like art nowadays is not something you can touch or experience in that sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Or
like letting go that people are kind of scared to go through the threshold of like walking into the space, like acclimatizing and picking something and reading it, just like giving these like steps for people to interact with the work, and people don't necessarily do that. So kind of letting that go and letting people do what they want in the space, and kind of just like, if people want to have a conversation, that's okay, but then that being like all my expectations for how I wanted it to go, to let that just be, this is in the air, this is what's happening right now, just go with it and flow with it. And,
because it's not in your hands at the end of the day.
Exactly.
I had a conversation about this with another artist also recently, where it's also like you can't be there the whole day to explain your work to everyone. Yeah. At some point you just need to let go of it, and like, because even if you're there one moment and you see those things that you just described happening, another day you're not there and people just do or follow the work in a way that feels right to them. I actually want to thank you all so much for being here, for having a conversation with me, but also to give me like this deeper insight into your work and process. I appreciate it a lot. And I also want to tell everyone that still wants to come to the museum after hearing this, Knowing Cotton Otherwise, the exhibition will be on until October 2023, which seems like a lot of time. However, the exhibition changes and evolves in 3 phases, so make sure to come by as soon as you can so you get to see the first phase. That was it. Thank you so much for listening to us. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.